Imagine for a moment that the struggles you see in adults, the compulsions, the dependencies, the behaviors that seem irrational or destructive, are not the real problem. Imagine instead that they are symptoms of something much deeper, wounds that were inflicted long before adulthood in the tender years of childhood. What if addiction, rather than being a moral failing, is in fact a desperate cry for help, a sign of an inner child still yearning for safety, comfort, and love? This is what Gabbor, one of the world's leading voices on trauma, addiction, and healing, has revealed through decades of research and clinical work. Addiction, he argues, is not about the substance, nor the behavior itself. It is about the pain that lies underneath. Whether it manifests as alcohol, drugs, compulsive eating, gambling, or even excessive work, at the core of every addiction is an attempt to soothe a wound. Now think about this. How often do we look at people suffering from addiction and judge them harshly? Society labels them as weak, irresponsible, or broken, but rarely do we stop to ask, what happened to you, instead of, what's wrong with you? This shift in perspective changes everything, because behind every addictive behavior, there is a story. Behind every destructive pattern, there is a child who did not feel safe, who did not feel seen, who did not feel loved unconditionally. Before we go deeper, let me remind you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like if these ideas resonate with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. What we are about to explore can truly change how you see addiction, trauma, and even your own life journey. Stay with me until the very end, because the last revelation I will share with you is the most important, and it might shift your understanding of healing forever. Let us dive into the roots of this subject. To understand addiction, we must first understand childhood. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain is not fully formed at birth. It develops through interaction with the environment, particularly through the relationship between the child and their caregivers. When those early relationships are nurturing, loving, and consistent, the child develops a sense of safety. The brain learns how to regulate stress, how to feel calm, how to trust others. But when those early relationships are unstable, neglectful, or abusive, the opposite occurs. The child's nervous system is thrown into chaos. Stress hormones flood their body. They live in a state of vigilance, constantly scanning the environment for threats. Over time, this shapes not only their psychology, but also their biology. The child grows up with an internal void, an emptiness that demands to be filled. And when they discover substances or behaviors that provide temporary relief, the brain latches onto them like a lifeline. That is the birth of addiction. Sigmund Freud once said that unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. Childhood trauma is precisely this: unexpressed pain, locked away because the child had no means to process it. Addiction is one of the many uglier ways that this pain resurfaces. Consider the story of many recovering addicts who, when asked, often reveal histories of neglect, abandonment, or emotional absence from their parents. Some might not recall explicit abuse, yet they describe growing up in homes where they felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy. The absence of emotional attunement, where a parent fails to connect with a child's inner world, can be as damaging as overt abuse, and this leads to a profound realization. The opposite of addiction is not simply sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This is why healing addiction requires far more than just willpower or detox. It requires addressing the wounds of disconnection that originated in childhood. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed patterns in your own life where you reach for something, whether food, social media, work, or shopping, not out of genuine desire, but as a way to numb discomfort? How often do you catch yourself escaping into distractions instead of sitting with your feelings? These behaviors may not look as destructive as substance addiction, but they come from the same place: the desire to avoid pain, loneliness, or emptiness. Carl Jung once observed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Addiction is one of the most powerful examples of this truth. The unconscious wounds of childhood silently shape our adult lives until we become aware of them and begin the work of healing. As we continue this exploration, I invite you to hold this idea close. Addiction is not the enemy. It is a messenger. It is the psyche's way of pointing us toward the pain that has not yet been healed. If we can shift our perception from condemnation to compassion, both for ourselves and others, we unlock the first step toward true transformation. And here is the promise. In the next parts of this journey, we will go deeper into the science of how trauma rewires the brain, how childhood experiences shape adult behavior, and most importantly, how healing is possible. Because the story does not end with pain, it leads toward growth, resilience, and profound self-discovery. So stay with me, because the revelations ahead will challenge the way you think about addiction and trauma, and the final insight we will uncover together may just change the way you view yourself and every person you meet. When we speak of addiction as a cry from childhood, we are not merely using poetic language. Modern neuroscience shows us that the very architecture of the brain is shaped by early experiences. The developing brain is like soft clay, molded by every interaction, every touch, every tone of voice, every expression of love, or its absence. A child who grows up in an environment of warmth and safety develops neural pathways of trust, resilience, and emotional regulation. But a child who grows up in neglect, chaos, or fear develops pathways of survival, hypervigilance, and emotional hunger. This is why Gabbor insists that addiction is never about the drug or the behavior itself. Alcohol, heroin, gambling, or even the glow of a smartphone screen are only secondary. They are simply the tools that numb pain or simulate a sense of belonging. The real story is the pain behind them. Think about what happens to a child who cries out and is not comforted. Their nervous system learns that the world is not safe. Their body floods with stress hormones like cortisol. Their brain wires itself to anticipate rejection rather than trust. Now imagine that same child as an adult. When they feel loneliness, fear, or emptiness, their body reacts with the same primal panic. But as adults, instead of crying in the crib, they reach for a bottle, a needle, or a compulsive behavior. The need is the same, to be soothed. The method is what changes. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." Childhood trauma often strips a child of their authentic self. They learn to suppress feelings, to hide their needs, to mold themselves into what others expect. Over time, this creates an inner void. Addiction becomes a way to fill that void, to escape the pain of being disconnected from one's true self. Let me ask you directly, how often do you silence your true feelings to avoid conflict? How often do you find yourself saying, "I'm fine," when deep down, you are not? These patterns are not random. They are survival strategies learned in childhood. And yet, they are the same strategies that fuel addictive behaviors in adulthood. Science supports this connection. Studies on adverse childhood experiences, known as the AC studies, reveal that the more childhood trauma a person endures, the greater their likelihood of developing addiction, depression, heart disease, or even cancer later in life. Trauma embeds itself not only in the mind but in the body. The child grows up, but the body still carries the imprint of fear, loneliness, and neglect. And here lies a great paradox. The very behaviors that cause suffering in adulthood were once necessary for survival in childhood. The child who learned to shut down emotions did so because feeling too much was unbearable. The child who sought escape in fantasy or food did so because reality was too painful. These were acts of resilience. But as adults, those same coping mechanisms become chains that bind us. Addiction is one of those chains. The writer James Baldwin once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." This is the painful but liberating truth about addiction. Until we are willing to face the wounds of childhood, we remain trapped in cycles of self-destruction. But when we begin to face them, healing becomes possible. This is why Gabbor often says that the real question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Addiction is simply the surface. Pain is the root. To heal, we must dare to look beneath. But how do we do this? How do we face pain that has been buried for decades? The first step is compassion. Compassion toward ourselves and others. Instead of judging the addict as weak or broken, we recognize the wounded child inside them. Instead of condemning ourselves for our own compulsive behaviors, we recognize that they were once attempts at survival. Compassion does not excuse destructive behavior, but it allows us to understand it. And in that understanding lies the power to transform it. Let us pause here and reflect together. How different would our society be if, Instead of punishing addiction with shame and stigma, we approached it with empathy and curiosity. How many lives could be changed if, instead of asking, "What did you do wrong?" we asked, "What happened to you?" This question alone can open the door to healing. Think of Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Addiction is not only about changing behaviors, it is about changing the way we see ourselves. Instead of identifying with the wound, we learn to identify with the part of us that is capable of healing. And yet, let us not pretend this is easy. Facing childhood trauma can feel overwhelming, like reopening wounds we thought were closed. But remember, those wounds are already alive within us. They surface in our anxiety, our compulsions, our addictions. By turning toward them with awareness, we no longer let them control us unconsciously. So I ask you, what patterns in your life feel like chains? What behaviors do you turn to when you feel empty, lonely, or afraid? And more importantly, what do those behaviors reveal about the child you once were? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Because the path to freedom from addiction begins not with running from pain, but with turning toward it. In the next part of this journey, we will explore more deeply how trauma is stored in the body, how the nervous system remembers what the mind forgets, and how reconnecting with our authentic self is the key to breaking free from destructive cycles. The revelations ahead will continue to challenge the way you see addiction, but they will also offer a powerful vision of healing that is within your reach. Stay with me, because the final insight, the one waiting at the end of this journey, will not only reframe your understanding of addiction, but may also show you the path back to your truest self. If trauma begins in childhood and burrows deep into the nervous system, then healing must begin in the very places where those wounds were formed, in the body, in the mind, and in the heart. Addiction is not simply a pattern of behavior, it is a state of disconnection. Disconnection from the body, disconnection from emotions, and most painfully, disconnection from the authentic self. Healing, therefore, is the process of reconnection. Consider this: the body does not forget. Long after the conscious mind has pushed away memories of pain, the body carries them. Trauma researchers like Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, have shown how trauma is literally stored in the muscles, in the nervous system, in the very physiology of our being. A person may not remember being neglected as a child, but their body remembers. They may not recall the details of emotional abuse, but their body reacts with tension, fear, or shutdown when intimacy arises. This is why addiction is so powerful. Substances and behaviors temporarily override the body's memory. They provide fleeting relief from sensations that feel unbearable. But of course, this relief is an illusion. The pain does not disappear. It waits beneath the surface, ready to return the moment the drug wears off or the behavior ends. This cycle explains why willpower alone is rarely enough to overcome addiction. You cannot simply tell the body to forget. You cannot lecture the nervous system into calmness. Healing requires something deeper. Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychologist, once wrote, "When I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." Acceptance is not resignation. It is the foundation of transformation. Many people trapped in addiction live under the weight of shame, believing themselves to be weak or defective. Yet shame only deepens the wound. Healing begins when we can look at ourselves with compassion, recognizing that our addictive behaviors are not proof of weakness, but evidence of pain that has not yet been healed. Think for a moment. What would it feel like to stop judging yourself for your struggles and instead see them as messages from within? What if every time you felt the urge to escape, you paused and asked, "What pain is this pointing to? What is my inner child asking for?" This shift can be the beginning of profound healing. Let us explore how this plays out in real life. Imagine a man who grew up with an emotionally distant father. As a child, he longed for approval, but no matter what he did, he felt invisible. Decades later, as an adult, he finds himself compulsively working, driven by the need to prove his worth. On the surface, he may be praised for his productivity, but deep down, he is enslaved to the same wound, the hunger for recognition that was never satisfied in childhood. His addiction is not to work itself, but to the fleeting sense of validation it provides. Or consider a woman who grew up in a chaotic household, where anger and conflict were constant. Her nervous system learned to live in a state of hyper-arousal, always prepared for an explosion. As an adult, she turns to alcohol, not because she loves the drink, but because it numbs the storm inside her. The alcohol becomes her shield against the memories her body still carries. These stories reveal a profound truth. Addiction is never random. It is always rooted in experience. When we understand the why behind the behavior, we begin to see addiction not as the enemy, but as a misguided attempt at self-healing. But here is the challenge. The same survival strategies that once kept us safe in childhood now keep us trapped in adulthood. The child who learned to numb their feelings now struggles to feel anything at all. The child who learned to escape through distraction now struggles to remain present. The very mechanisms of survival become prisons. How do we break free? The answer lies in reconnection. Reconnection to the body through practices like mindfulness, yoga, and breathwork that calm the nervous system and teach us to feel again. Reconnection to others through safe, nurturing relationships where vulnerability is met with compassion rather than rejection. And most importantly, reconnection to the authentic self, the part of us that existed before the trauma, before the adaptation, before the addiction. Gabbor Mate teaches that healing is not about fixing ourselves, but about finding ourselves. The authentic self is never destroyed. It is only hidden beneath layers of pain. The journey of healing is the journey of uncovering it. Let me ask you again, when was the last time you felt truly yourself, without masks, without fear of judgment, without the need to numb or escape? For many, it has been years, sometimes decades, but that self is still there, waiting to be rediscovered. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Addiction thrives in the absence of a why. It fills the void where meaning should be. This is why healing requires more than abstinence. It requires rediscovering purpose, meaning, and connection. When the void is filled with authentic purpose, the grip of addiction loosens. Yet let us be honest, this is not a quick or easy process. Healing is a lifelong journey, not a one-time event. But every step toward reconnection, every act of self-compassion, every moment of awareness, every genuine connection with another human being weakens the chains of addiction. As we continue, I invite you to reflect. What are the places in your life where you feel most disconnected? Where do you sense the echoes of childhood pain in your adult patterns? And most importantly, what would reconnection look like for you? In the final part of this journey, we will uncover the most powerful revelation of all, that addiction, far from being a curse, can become a teacher. It can point us back to the places where healing is most needed, and in doing so guide us to a deeper, more authentic life. The last insight I will share with you has the power not only to transform how you see addiction, but how you see suffering itself. Stay with me, because the ending of this exploration is where everything will come together, and it may change the way you view your past, your pain, and your path forward. Throughout this journey, we have seen that addiction is not a random defect of character, but a reflection of wounds left unhealed from childhood. It is the body's memory of pain, the psyche's attempt to protect itself, and the spirit's desperate cry for connection. But now we arrive at the most powerful revelation of all. Addiction is not only a wound, it can also be a doorway. Gabbor Mate often reminds us that our suffering, if we choose to face it, can become our teacher. Addiction in this sense is not the enemy, but a guide pointing us toward the very places where healing is most needed. The substance or behavior that once numbed us can, paradoxically, lead us back to the truth we tried to escape. The cracks created by trauma can also be the cracks through which light enters. Imagine standing before a mirror, seeing not the shame or weakness you once believed defined you, but the resilience and survival instinct that carried you this far. Imagine realizing that what you once thought was brokenness was, in fact, your attempt to remain alive in a world that felt unsafe. This shift is the beginning of transformation. The philosopher Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." This is the essence of healing from addiction. The very wound that caused us to seek escape becomes the place where compassion, understanding, and growth take root. Addiction reveals where the wound lies, and in doing so, it shows us where to apply the medicine of love, presence, and connection. But this requires courage. It means no longer running from pain, but turning toward it. It means embracing the inner child who still longs for comfort and safety. It means giving to ourselves now what we did not receive then: unconditional love, patience, and compassion. Healing begins when we stop asking, "How do I get rid of this addiction?" and instead ask, "What is this addiction trying to show me?" Let us pause here and reflect. What if every destructive pattern in your life, every compulsion, every escape was not a curse but a message? What if instead of hating these parts of yourself, you listened to them? What if you discovered that they were simply the echoes of a younger you, still waiting to be seen and held? When we begin to listen, transformation unfolds. Neuroscience shows us that the brain has the capacity for neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire itself. The wounds of childhood do not have to define us forever. With awareness, compassion, and connection, we can create new pathways of resilience, trust, and joy. This is not just theory. It is a lived reality for countless individuals who have walked the path of recovery. But healing is not a solitary endeavor. The opposite of addiction, as we have said, is connection. No one heals alone. We need safe relationships, communities, and spaces where vulnerability is met with empathy rather than judgment. In sharing our stories, we dissolve shame. In receiving compassion, we learn to offer it to ourselves. And in finding connection, we replace the emptiness that once fueled addiction with a sense of belonging. Think of Viktor Frankl once more, who taught that even in the darkest circumstances, we have the power to choose our response. Addiction narrows our world until all that exists is the pursuit of relief. Healing expands our world again, reminding us that we are not defined by our pain, but by the meaning we choose to make of it. So let me ask you directly, what meaning will you make of your suffering? Will you see it only as a burden, or will you allow it to become a teacher? Will you continue to run from the wound, or will you let the light enter through it? This is the final and most important truth. Addiction can be the path back to your authentic self. The same pain that once broke you can become the catalyst that awakens you. When you face your wounds with compassion, you do not simply heal from addiction. You reclaim the self that was buried beneath trauma. And in doing so, you discover a strength, a depth, and a wisdom that can only be forged through suffering transformed into growth. As we close this journey, I invite you to carry this message with you. You are not broken. You are not defined by your addiction. You are a human being who adapted to pain in the best way you could at the time. Now you have the power to choose a new path, not by rejecting your past, but by embracing it and learning from it. If this message has resonated with you, I encourage you to share it, to leave a comment with your reflections, and to connect with others who may be struggling. Remember, the opposite of addiction is connection, and every act of sharing creates more light for others who are still in darkness. The journey of healing is not linear. It is filled with setbacks, breakthroughs, and discoveries. But each step is worth it, because at the end of that journey lies something far greater than sobriety. At the end lies the rediscovery of your true self, the self that is whole, worthy, and deeply connected to life. And so I leave you with these words of wisdom, once spoken by Leonard Cohen. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. But may you find the courage to embrace your cracks, to allow the light to enter, and to let your addiction lead you not into despair, but into the profound beauty of healing and transformation. Thanks for looking.